Well, today we've come to the Kent Tea and Trading Company, who are based in Pluckley at Pivington Hill. And Pluckley is one of the most, or if not the most, haunted village in the UK. Paul Stoneman's come along with me, and we've come to meet Richard Smith, who is the managing director of the
partner
of the
along with mother.
Marvellous. Now, you're not originally from the UK at all, are you?
We were in India the family's been in India for three generations now of tea planters and plantation owners. And when we retired back to UK about 25 years ago, we started to sell a bit of tea. As the local grocer said, can you get me a bit of tea from India, and we obliged.
So from that humble beginnings, the Kent Tea Company was founded.
Pluckley Tea is the main brand, and we used to start off at home. The factory was at home, and we used to buy tea bags loose in a tea chest, and we used to have one of the bedrooms set aside, and we used to count out little piles of 10 tea bags, and then 8 go into make up 80 tea bags, and then you hand seal it, and then the first machine came along.
So a lot of hard work then in the early days.
Absolutely, a lot of you're counting by hand every tea bag, and then Mother threw us out of the house because of the tea everywhere. So we had to take a unit, which was this unit, and we've been here about 20 years. But the company's been going 25 years now.
So set up in 1982, was it?
1982-ish. Yes, yeah.
So I know it's Pluckley tea. It's obviously not grown here, is it?
Because we fell for the rumours ourselves that on the slopes here that the tea was grown.
Well, it's the south-facing slopes, and which is very beneficial for tea growing, and but it's quite a labour-intensive pastime. So you need obviously staff, tea pluckers.
So it wouldn't be impossible to grow it in this country.
No, at the moment there's somebody trying to grow some in Cornwall, who we advised about 10 years ago.
Well, not to do it.
Not to do it. I think there's one valley, in Cornwall. But, they grow some tea, and then they blend it in with Indian teas, and so it's a very small crop, but it's, for Harrods of this world,
right,
at about, £30 for a small pack, again, probably hand-picked, and they've probably got elephants as well.
In Cornwall?
In Cornwall.
Oh, fantastic. So tell us about tea itself then. The bit that we use for the tea is obviously the leaves, as in tea leaves, and you mentioned that it's quite labour intensive, so presumably you can't just send a tractor down and
well, quality teas are you just pluck the 2 leaves in a bud. That's the first growth that you pluck. So that would always traditionally be done by hand. Especially in Darjeeling and in India. But today there are more modern districts or tea plantation districts, and they just have fields of tea, and they just come down and they just cut the top off with like a combine harvester machine. But when you do that, you get
all sorts of crap.
All sorts of sticks, bits of stick, and the hard parts of the plant. So it's not quality, but the bulk of the market is not the quality, it's the mass.
So they would still use that bit though, even though you've got all that, you would get something, you would still get a cup of tea.
It's actually cut, by the time it gets into tea bags, that's cut down to a powder, if you like, and there's a big market in tea dust.
Is there?
Yes.
So is that the sort of stuff that we might buy in our local supermarket at rock bottom prices?
Especially, we were offered quite a bit from Russia, and they have tea dust, and they have tea that looks like a tobacco, if you like. But the district, Chernobyl was a bit too close, and still is. But that tea is still sold to certain parts of the world now. Yeah, so. Hot stuff.
That explains a lot of your tea I drink.
Thank you very much. Yes. Well, it's radioactive tea, obviously.
Tea dust is very. It brews very quickly. It's very cheap. So if you've got a blend of tea, if you something to fill in the last 10-20%, you shove in a bit of tea dust, because in England now, when people put a tea bag in a pot, in a cup, hot water on, splish splash, take it out 10 seconds later, and that's tea.
Right.
But there's no, where's the 3-minute brewing? So that's why the majority of tea bags in this country are 2-cup tea bags. There's over 3 grams of tea, whereas 2 grams of tea would suffice if everybody was patient enough. But
they're not.
They're not. No, nobody's going to sit and wait for 3-5 minutes. 3 to 5 minutes is a good brew time for a lot of teas.
You said that over here in England, us Brits are a little bit. We don't tend to go for the higher quality grade of tea. Presumably, when teas was first coming into this country, we were a little bit more selective, were they? What sort of went wrong?
Traditionally, I think it's a generational thing. My mother's generation, they appreciated loose tea in a pot and doing it properly and warming the pot and fresh water. But as the generations and the time has worn on, the younger generations are a little bit they want to rush and tea bag sales have increased, whereas loose tea sales, loose teas are basically the better quality teas. Loose tea sales are still maybe about 10% of the market. So tea bags do
dominate that.
For the convenience sake, and with leaf, when you make a pot of leaf tea, you've got to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Either on your garden or sell it to somebody or or whatever.
So, I mean, in the Victorian days, tea was quite a sort of ceremony, really,
yes,
wasn't
it? It was only really for the upper classes, the lords and ladies in there.
And of course, it was taxed, wasn't it, very heavily?
Yeah. Yes, it was a rich man's product.
But now, of course, it's become very much a daily thing that we take for granted, and we. In many respects, we don't give it the time of day to realise what's involved. And I suppose
it's come halfway around the world, and we actually pack and have teas here that come in from China and Japan. They come all the way over here, and we pack them up and send them all the way back to China and Japan.
It seems slightly absurd, doesn't it?
Yeah,
but it obviously travels well, tea, and it can last presumably for a long time, because the teas, when they originally were coming over, were taking months, presumably, to get across the ocean.
If they're packed and stored properly. I think there was an example of some tea stuck in the Suez Canal for years and years, and then when it came out, the tea had been written off, but when it actually appeared and they opened it up, it was fine.
Oh, right.
But as long as it's stored and kept really dry, obviously it picks up any dampness, and it can pick up, tea's hygroscopic, so it's can pick up any smells or taints. If you store it next to some bleach or something, if the tea tastes of something else the next time you try it, then
so it doesn't mature over time.
No, not
once it's tea and that's it.
There's very subtle changes of taste with certain types of tea, like Keemuns and oolongs. Sometimes they can be better tasting a year down the line, and then there's the Chinese tea called a pu'er, which is sometimes buried underground for 10 years before to develop it, to store it and it comes out, and the tasting notes for that is it's got earthy taste. Surprise. Yes.
So what happens to the tea? Let's just run by the process. You've got the plants, and you pick the tips and the buds.
Yes.
And do you then do something to that, because there's lots of different types of tea, and so this is where it starts getting very misty in my mind, and I'm sure a lot of people's mind, that what then happens to make it turn up into a tea bag and be what we would recognise as tea, which clearly isn't what we actually recognise as tea, because we're drinking the wrung stuff.
Yes, the bulk of tea, which is black tea, and from the tea leaves are dried and then dried under heat, and so they become a large black and dried up leaf, and then they are rolled and cut to various grades of tea. There are many different fannings is the term for tea bag grade tea, which is very fine. It's not dusty. It can be dusty, but it's just a fine grade of tea, because it has to flow. Tea bag machines operate by flow. If you had wiry leaves in there, they're not going to flow like in an organ. So you need a fine tea to sort of flow into the tea bag.
Like a sand, really, because we looked at your tea machine, and it's just like a sand timer as it's coming down.
And you can adapt machines to put through heavy leaf teas, but it's a dosing thing. It's quite technical because it can block up quite easily, so you need to just feed it a little at a time. But generally, Pecco Fanning's grades of tea are used for tea bags.
The plants themselves, the tea plant, are there different varieties of tea plant? Are there sort of many different, so that's giving you the different type, or is it what you do with the leaf?
There are different types for, in India, they come from the camellia family, but they're just different, as I'd say, in Hindi jats, which are different types of plants. They sort of vary to cope with different. In India, you get your monsoon type climates, but in East Africa, where a lot of tea, the bulk of UK tea now is grown in East Africa, on plantations without shade trees, and that's a drier environment. So, over the years, plants have been, and strains of plants have been adapted to grow in different environments.
How many harvests can you get from the same plant in a year, or is it a one-off thing?
Well, at the higher end, you have the Darjeeling teas, which come from the foothills of the Himalayas, which is still in India, but there's a little bit that goes up into the Himalayas, which is Darjeeling.
Right, yeah.
We used to go up there and stay and inspect the tea estates up there. Darjeeling is under Kanchenjunga, so in the morning you get up and Kanchenjunga was there in front of you. But there you have your first flush teas, your second flush teas, and then there's a third flush teas, which is basically the first flush teas are being picked at about this time of year, and 2 leaves in a bud is taken, all the finest new growth of the season is taken, and then a period of time later, 2-3 months later, the second picking will happen, and then if they're desperate to get a third in, they'll sort of, but the quality diminishes as the year goes on. But
so the first picking is the finest quality teas.
Yes. So Darjeeling first flush is the champagne of teas, the very finest stuff, and quite often it's air freighted